The Nets go into Minnesota and things sort of continue on the same track, which is to say, not great over in Brooklyn World. Another loss here to the Timberwolves, a post-deadline disaster for the Nets. Game 2 for Kevin Ollie, much of the same, plus a Ben Simmons update that we might not want to hear. It's all coming up next. But first, theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo. All right, welcome back to the Locked On Nets podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day as we cook through the rest of the regular season with this team. I am Doug Norrie, owner-operator at DFSR.com. If you need projections for DraftKings, FanDuel, wherever, head on over to DFSR.com. Come say hi. We're grinding that every single night. No Adam Armbrecht on the podcast today. He is out of pocket, but that's all right. We're in pocket talking about the Brooklyn Nets. Again, thanks for making the Locked On Nets podcast your first listen of the day when it comes to Brooklyn Nets content, free and available on all those great podcast platforms. Also over on YouTube at Locked On Nets. Come be part of the group. It's getting us towards 7,000 subscribers over on YouTube. Much appreciated, everyone that's over there. Again, commenting and weighing in and everything else about the Brooklyn Nets on a day-to-day basis, because obviously this has been a really, really rough go of it, right? I mean, there's so many ways that we can dissect this thing for what's happening in Brooklyn Nets territory. It's been a really, really rough stretch, to say the least. To say that it's gone sort of off the rails at this point, I think is probably a totally fair statement. The Nets have now lost 7 of their last 8 games, with that one win being over San Antonio on Saturday the 10th. They've now lost 4 in a row with the last 3 games against Boston. Obviously, that 50-point blowout prior to the All-Star break that ultimately got Jock Vaughn fired. Then they get in the first game with Kevin Ollie as the new head coach. They get dumpstered by Toronto in Toronto, 121-93. And then they go into Minnesota, a tough matchup, obviously, with a Minnesota team that has pretty high playoff, maybe even championship aspirations at this point. But ultimately, the result ends up being much like those previous 2 games, 101-86. They end up losing to the Timberwolves in a game that we did see a few things different from Kevin Ollie and company when it came to the rotations. But in terms of overall performance, was just another really, really disappointing outing. I mean, obviously, if you just heard me say the numbers here, their last 3 games, 86 points, 93 points, 86 points. And yeah, Boston, good team. Minnesota, really good defensive team. No Rudy Gobert, though, so you maybe want to take that into account with how we evaluate the performance. And a Toronto team who has no business keeping anyone under 100 points, and yet they were able to do that with relative ease against this Brooklyn Nets team. So the loss to Minnesota ends up just becoming another sort of dark mark on how the season is going. A bunch of stuff went wrong for the Nets, really, in a number of different facets. It was something of a rock fight for this game. Obviously, pretty low scoring. Minnesota ends up only putting up 101 points total. The score was 45-42 at halftime, which lets you know sort of a little bit around what was going on just in terms of the offensive output. The Nets end up shooting just 6 of 35 from 3. Mikal Bridges, in particular, struggled from beyond the arc, 1 of 11 overall shooting night for him. Cam Thomas was 0 for 5 from beyond the arc. Dorian Finney-Smith 1 for 4 from beyond the arc. They just really, the starting lineup ends up taking 23 pointers, ends up hitting 2. Bridges hit 1, DFS hit 1, and that's the end of that. And it's funny because you talk about sort of the modern NBA and what it takes to win, and it's a make or miss league. And we kind of understand this on a high level, that if you're not going to be able to hit threes, you're going to struggle to end up winning games, which I appreciate. And Kevin Ollie said as much after the game. He's like, we got good looks. I think that was relatively true, that they got some good looks during this game. But if you look at this team, how high can your expectation be for a team in the modern NBA to shoot 3-pointers when you rolled out 100 minutes of Nick Claxton, Daron Sharp, Dennis Smith Jr., Ben Simmons, and to some degree, Dennis Schroeder. Like if that's going to be 100 of your 240 minutes on the basketball court, which represents 42% of your overall player minutes in a game, like what can really your expectation be around 3-point shooting? It can never be that high. Now it shouldn't be 6 for 30, 6 for 35, 17%. Obviously, like that's still running very, very poorly. But in terms of just like, are they going to shoot the lights out of the building with this group overall? No. And it's just everything's going to be an uphill climb when it comes to how they're sort of put together at this point. I understand that you're going to have to play some of these guys together because among that group that I just read to you, and we'll get to Ben Simmons here shortly, but among the group I just read to you, obviously a lot of those guys need to be playing or deserve, quote unquote, deserve to have playing time. So you're going to run into sort of functional issues when it comes to spacing. But when, Ollie comes in after the game and says, you thought we played well. And I think defensively they did play a lot better, which I will talk about here shortly. But in terms of the offensive output, what really can be the expectation when that's 100 of your 240 minutes? There's some of those guys are total zeros when it comes to spacing. And a couple of them are bad, if not, well below average. And if that's going to be how you play a lot of your minutes, what are you expecting to happen? It's going to be tough to shoot from that group. Again, they have problems here. They have problems with the way the roster is constructed. They have problems with just like sort of who can play with who. They have a talent deficiency sort of just across the board. I think there's guys that deserve to play, but there's no real superstars in this team. And they're just a very sort of average to below average team when it comes to overall NBA talent, even in the middle to end part of their bench. So it's not, I guess what I'm saying is disappointing, but it's not surprising, right? To see another performance like this, to see them, go out and score 86 points to a good defensive team. It's disappointing. And we want these outcomes to be very different. But when you look at the whole of what the Nets sort of have going on here, it's really, you can't be all that surprised by it. They built a team that just has a couple guys that can get their own shots. They do have some floor spacers on the team, but if you're going to deploy these kinds of minutes to these kinds of non-spacers, then you're just going to struggle from the 3-point line. That's just the whole story kind of. And we did see a few different rotations that the coaching staff put out there. I think some of those were encouraging, that there was at least a recognition that some of these groupings aren't going to work all that well together. And maybe we'll see some more of it going forward, though we're going to have to figure out where things are with Ben Simmons and his injury and how much they're even going to be able to get creative around minutes when it comes to Simmons, which it looks like they did try. This didn't look like they did try to do in this game, but we're just presented with a lot of the same problems where the Nets are right now. They have problems in the rotation. They have problems with their talent. They have gotten underperformances from nearly everybody on the team so far this season. Things are trending in completely the wrong direction. And if you are a fan of the team like we are, and you're watching this team every night, it does get trickier and trickier to sort of find the light at the end of the tunnel. It gets a little harder with each one of these losses to put your finger on what exactly is going to be the thing that turns this Nets team around. Again, they went in as -8 or +8.5 point underdogs. The expectations were not that they were going to go into Minnesota and win this game. But when we see the same kind of things happening over and over with this team, it does give you the sense that this thing is spiraling in a way that as we, work to close out the rest of the season, right now they're 21-35 on the season, as they have 26 more games. As we work to close out the rest of the season, there is a little bit of a sense that we could get more of this along the way. And I think to some degree, we need to buckle up for that. I want to talk about some of the rotations the Nets did throw out there, some of the changes that they made, some of the defensive effort, which I think was there. Also talk about some of the numbers post trade deadline, which are really, really problematic. We'll talk about that here in a second. First, going to tell you about our friends over at Grammarly. No matter what kind of work you do, how you communicate is the key. You have emails, you got reports, you got presentations. They're all equally important for the collaboration needed to get things done. Here's where Grammarly can help. Frankly, Grammarly is basically necessary if you are in this kind of work. I am a longtime premium Grammarly user. I think I'm one of the power users at this point with how much writing and editing I do during the day. I could not even hope to do half of it without Grammarly. Grammarly steps in helps me rewrite some things to make them sound better. Obviously, the punctuation, the spelling, the grammar. They got an AI writing partner that's going to help be able to fill in some of the gaps for you. Maybe just even kickstart you on some of your ideas to kind of get out of that writer's block that you can sometimes feel when you're just sitting down to write the email, when you're sitting down to write the message, whatever it is. Grammarly has become, like I said, for me, a critical, necessary, needed part of my everyday workflow. 96% of all Grammarly users report that Grammarly helps them craft more impactful writing. Works across 500,000 apps and websites. It's going to understand your writing context. It's going to provide relevant and personalized suggestions. Grammarly just gets it. It's the partner that you need if you're trying to communicate online these days. Make a bigger impact at work with Grammarly. Sign up and download for free at Grammarly.com/podcast. That's Grammarly, GRAMMARLY.com/podcast. Easier said, done. All right, we did see a few different things from the Nets in this game. We said going into it that we really wanted to see the team begin to at least spread out the Simmons minutes from some of those true center guys like Nick Claxton, like Day'Ron Sharpe. The first game with Kevin Ollie as coach, they paired up Simmons each time. Every one of his minutes overlapped with one of those true centers, which is it's just going to be tough, right? It's not going to help optimize what Simmons does bring to the court. We did see some of that change in this game. They were able to run out a lineup that had Simmons and Dorian Finney-Smith, which we thought was an important pairing to sort of kind of like come together to get at least some rim protection, some size, space it out a little bit. We'll try to get some shooters. I feel like they almost got there, but not completely. So I thought, the thesis here was correct in that they did run those two guys out, but they also, with that pairing, had Dennis Smith Jr. out there, I guess, to sort of help on the defensive front. But we know that Dennis Smith Jr. just at this point is not really a floor spacer. So I think that does sort of negate some of what you were trying to do with the group, which is to say, our thought process here was get Simmons out there, make sure there's 4 other definitive floor spacers out there. Dorian Finney-Smith, I think, is one of them. Mikal Bridges obviously was out there with that group. He's another. Cam Johnson got into that group a little bit. Oh, no, he didn't. So the Cam Johnson did not get into that group, but they ended up having Lonnie Walker in that group. I would have liked to see, Jalen Wilson instead of Dennis Smith Jr. Jalen Wilson's been sort of mysteriously buried here. He was shooting 69% from 3 over his previous 5 games. Then they make the coaching change and he just is nowhere to be found. Find that to be a little confusing. Would have liked to see him part of that group. Would have maybe liked to see Cam Johnson part of the group, as someone else that can shoot threes. I understand that they're just maybe wanting to, if they think that Lonnie Walker is out there, have some other, just core defensive piece in there. But like I said, when it comes to floor spacing, it does take away some of the advantage that you think you had. They ran that lineup for about 3 to 4 minutes. I think overall, I appreciated the sort of the idea behind it. I thought it looked okay at times. They were able to get after the defensive end. Obviously, with the Simmons update that we'll give here shortly, I'm not sure how much we're going to see that, but I do think I did want to at least sort of pay respect to the idea that they did try to run a few different things. Few too many 3-guard lineups still for my liking. I get where they're have trouble here because they want to play a true center, but then you end up playing the Schroeder, Lonnie Walker plus Cam Thomas group together, or Dennis Smith Jr. thrown in there. It just gets really, really small for a team that was supposed to have a some Cam Thomas group too, for a group that's supposed to have these wings like Cam Johnson, like Dorian Finney-Smith, like Jalen Wilson's on the team. We just don't really see enough of it together. And that's a little confusing to me, with the understanding that this roster has problems on it and constraints on it with, finding the minutes among these guys. So, it's fun. They were in the first half, certainly first quarter, were looking good. And I was really begging to not have these 3-guard lineups come out. They run one of them, and immediately Minnesota goes on an 11-0 run. Now, I know I'm picking and choosing my spots here with being frustrated with some of the combinations, but sometimes the writing is on the wall with these kinds of pairings, especially against a Minnesota team that's thrown out like Anthony Edwards. They got Kyle Anderson out there. They have McDaniels, right? They have Cat. That's going to be, from a size perspective, you're going to be in trouble here running smaller groups. So a little bit of a step in the right direction in terms of rotations, not completely there, all things considered. And just really in general, since the trade deadline, I mean, the Nets numbers are really, really disturbing. If you look at them, so February 8th, the trade deadline, Obviously, we're only like 2 weeks removed from this, and we knew that the team, was maybe not trending in the right direction. But my goodness, if you just look at the team over that stretch, right? So since February 8th, it's bad, man. Like, it's just really bad. There's no other way around that. Net rating overall, they rank 30th, minus 18 in net rating during that time, easily last place. Like, Portland Trail Blazers are minus 15.7. And then there's like a full 8-point jump to the Jazz at 12, or 7-point jump to the Jazz are minus 12.8. So it's the bottom five the bottom four are the Nets are 30th, Blazers at 29th, Jazz at 28th, Wizards at 27th in terms of overall net rating. That's a really, really good friends across town. Knicks 26th in net rating during that stretch, and -8. But like, the Nets are so far and away worse than some of these other teams that it's just so bad. The defensive rating, you want to say that's where they've been, quote, getting by. I mean, they ranked 25th in that stretch in defensive rating at 119.3. Only the Bulls, Hawks, Blazers, Knicks, and Jazz are worse than the Nets. And then the offense is where we're hitting the absolute nadir here. Nets easily the worst offensive team in basketball since the deadline at a 101.4 net rating. That is so bad. The next closest team is the Blazers at 106.1, nearly 5 points per 100 better than the Nets. And that's just going from 30th to 29th. That 4.7 jump is basically the same from 30th to 29th is basically the same as 29th all the way up to 21st, right? So you have to go an 8-spot difference you go 1 spot from 30th to 29th at a number, and then you go 8 spots from 29th to 21st in terms of just where they are in ranking. This is since the trade deadline. It's looked just as bad. There's so few things to really grab onto right now from a positivity standpoint, because you look at the process, you look at the product on the court, and you say to yourself, what's going to really end up changing here? I do think there's some changes along the margins that can be made, but overall, it's going to be a struggle. We worried that the players were kind of checked out when it came to Jacques Vaughn in terms of hustle and effort and just overall buy-in around where this team was going forward. Have you seen any changes in these last 2 games? I haven't. I mean, if you got dropped in and you had no idea who the coach of the team was, and you just watched these 2 games as compared to the previous, X amount of games, would you notice any real difference? I wouldn't. I mean, there's been very, very few differences here in terms of just like systems they're running. A little more pick and roll with Dennis Schroeder, I guess. But overall, you'd be hard pressed to find differences between what's happening now and what happened to Jacques Vaughn. And I know people wanted to dig Vaughn because of the coaching, and I think a lot of that criticism was really fair. And, we were hoping for a shot in the arm when it came to putting Kevin Ollie on the bench and being able to institute maybe just some more fight, some more fire, maybe some more schemes. It's only been 2 games, but any energetic boost that you were hoping to get from this team just hasn't been there at all. It really just hasn't. This looks pretty much identical to what we saw prior to the Vaughn firing, short of that one game with the last one with Jacques Vaughn. They lost by 50, and they've lost by slightly less these last couple games. But just in terms of overall product, I just don't see, there's really just no differences to be found. It's been a really, really disappointing stretch. And like I said, those post-trade deadline numbers those are alarm bell numbers, really alarm bell numbers. To be that bad, they're the worst team in basketball. That's it. They're since the trade deadline, 2 weeks, okay? They're the worst team in basketball, and it's not like they can point to like injuries or bad luck or this other stuff, whereas you can maybe do that, or tanking or whatever you can look at with some of these other teams. You can't do that with the Nets. They're trying. I mean, theoretically, they're trying, and they're still really bad. And when it comes to just overall outlook, it's a really, really tough spot to be in. Do want to talk a little bit here about Ben Simmons and what happened with him sort of at the end of the game, and what things might look like going forward. We'll talk about that here in a second. Before we get to that, talk about our friends over at Stitch Fix. Gonna make myself feel better with Stitch Fix right here. It's that instant confident boost you get from an outfit that makes you look really, really good. That's why I'm into Stitch Fix. That's why you need to be into Stitch Fix. It's a stylist who understands your style. They're gonna understand your size, your budget, your measurements, all of that. They're gonna do all the shopping for you. They're gonna send it to you for you to try on, see what it is you like. Send back what you don't, keep what you do. Believe me, you're going to like what they end up sending you and easily upgrade your wardrobe. This year, a professional stylist that helps you find that new on-trend favorites that are going to work for you. I'm wearing the Stitch Fix right now, the little Flag and Anthem hoodie. This thing came out of the box, and I knew instantly it was an absolute keeper. They had some other some jeans along the way, perfect fit, but I already had the same color. So you know what they're going to do? They're going to swap them out for another color, then just be exactly what I need, and that's away you go. The new Stitch Fix box for me is coming on the way. Even the family was getting excited about it for the stuff to come out of the box, just to see what they were going to send. And like I said, this stuff just hits home every time. I've barely taken off this hoodie since it came in the mail. Stitch Fix makes it easy. They do the shopping for you to save you the time and the effort, and they're going to make you look good in the process. Style that makes you feel as good as you look. Get started today at stitchfix.com/locked-on. That's stitchfix.com/locked-on. stitchfix.com/locked-on. All right, close things off here with some Ben Simmons talk. That is not great news, though we don't have any definitive news as of this recording. Simmons, if you were watching the game on Saturday, Simmons ended up leaving with what they initially called a left leg soreness, and he ended up not returning to the game. That was brought up during the broadcast. He ended up playing 15 minutes, had 4 points, 8 rebounds, had 3 steals along the way. Overall, had taken 6 shots. It was looking I felt fine. Like I said in the first part of this, that I was excited that they had ended up running some Simmons plus spacer, mostly lineups that we were hoping to see. We're hoping to kind of like start growing on some of this stuff with Ben Simmons. And then he ends up leaving the game with leg soreness, went to the locker room, ended up coming back out, sitting on the bench, but never returned to the game and was ruled out. I mean, it wasn't like he was sitting on the bench. We were waiting. They came from Nets PR and the broadcast that he had been ruled out for the game. After the game, the Nets were a little bit coy about sort of like what was going to end up happening with him, and saying that they weren't sure, although they eventually ended up saying that he was going to get imaging on the knee and the leg to see what was going on. And I'll tell you, like, if you want to talk about just sort of like the air being let out of the balloon, the wind being let out of your sails in terms of the Simmons boost that we thought we were going to get. No definitive news right now, but based on the track record here and based on sort of just like what's already happened with him, both in the short term and just in recent years around him not playing because of injury, which is all really, really unfortunate. It's very hard to go into this with an air of positivity around Simmons, right? We already know he sat out from November 6th through January 29th, right? Missed all that time as he got back from the nerve stuff in the hip. And he'd been playing pretty much consistently. He hadn't played some of the back-to-backs. He played in 8 games since then. But maybe it's unfair to write the story here before we have definitive news, but to go from, fine, quote unquote, to knee soreness or left leg soreness to we don't know what's going to happen to going to get imaging. I mean, it's like already just moving in such the wrong direction, or the troubling direction, in terms of what we already know about his injury stuff. And they had been playing pretty cautious with his minutes. They've been just wanting to probably, take it very easy to make sure that they could try to sustain having him over the course of the rest of the regular season. And this is just kind of like the worst news. You get this news where you have to be probably pretty concerned about like what the outlook for him is going forward over the rest of the year. And if nothing else, what we have to be concerned with is the thing that we'd sort of already been warning against for a long time, which is that it's going to be hard to pin hopes to the Nets season in any shape or form to Ben Simmons. It's just the injury prone aspect to his game now, and where he is just, it's all the way part of it. Right. Like it just is. Like, there's just no way around it. It's pretty clear that they could really use his skill set / need his skill set going forward to have like any floor raising capability around the rest of the roster. But you just can't trust that he's going to be, that his body's not going to fail him at this point. And it's unfortunate. It sucks. I believe me, this is the worst possible outcome for if you're clearly for Simmons, like, right. If he's hurt, hopefully he all comes back clean. He comes back next game. And that's, it seems unlikely, but we hope that to be the case. The more the point is that we're probably just now forever, or at least through the end of this contract this year and then next year, living with even if it looks good for stretches, you're going to be a hard time getting too excited about it. You just can't get excited about it because he's just not at a place where it looks like he can sustain long-term minutes and just long-term just play just based on his injury history. The back issue with the surgery, the hips, the knee, it probably ends up all being connected. When you start getting into back injuries, it gets really hard to not have those things cascade. And I don't know if we're looking at a cascading issue for him. It sure seems like it, but at just where he is with his career right now and how little he's played and how little he's been able to sustain long periods of real NBA starter level minutes, basically going on years now of not being able to do that, or a year plus of not being able to do that. I think we're just probably just in a place now where even if he were to come back and look, really spry and look great, we're always just going to be living with this. When is the other shoe going to drop in terms of his overall health? It really sucks. It was, to see that news come out from Nets PR was just a huge bummer. And we'll wait to see what happens when it comes to the imaging. We'll wait to see what happens when it ends up, what ultimately the timeline and his return is. Like I said, maybe it's just one game, or maybe it's no games. Maybe he's just back. Maybe it's all clear and everything looks good. With the way they've handled this, just in terms of just being very, very careful, I'd be surprised if that was the case, just because that just hasn't seemed how they were going. And just seeing how things sort of ramped up with reporting on the injury feels like there could be more there than less, but we'll wait and see. And hopefully we'll have some idea of that sometime on Monday, what would be the hope. So we'll see how it goes with Ben Simmons, but I think it's just another reminder that this might be just where we are with him and his career and the rest of his Nets tenure. All right, going to get out of here. Like I said, the Nets, if you're still rocking the Nets, look, appreciate you making the first listen every single day, free and available on all those great platforms. Go over to wegotnets.com. You want to read some stories from the Nets past? We worked on some, we give you a free ebook over there. I gotten really rave reviews on what we put together, and I'm really proud of what we put together over there. We need more stuff coming on We Got Nets as well. So make sure you go check out wegotnets.com. I always get to this part of the podcast where we want to get a quote from one of the great American poets, but it's always Adam's job to come up with the quotes. And I always get to this part, and this is when I first remember that I'm supposed to get a quote prior to the recording to make it sound like we've been prepared all the way. That's why we always get to this part and say Adam Armbrecht will be back next time. He's one of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.